Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm your host, Nathan Staples, and the Ligue 1 season has come to a conclusion. It was full of twists and turns, but tonight we review every single team in a bumper 2-hour special filled with guests. But before we get to that, here are the latest headlines. Ligue 1's final weekend lacked much of the drama of the second division, but Saturday's matches still had their fair share of drama. Caen's late equaliser at the Parc des Princes was probably the closest thing to a clutch goal at the weekend, the big forward stabbing home from close range to earn a 1-1 draw in injury time and avoid the relegation playoff. That goal allowed Caen to pull clear of Lorient, who also drew at home to Bordeaux. Among the other sides in the relegation scrap, Nantes won 3-1 at home to a depleted Saint-Etienne, but finished a point away from safety. Bastia travelled to Marseille and made a real go of it, but were unable to breach Yoann Pellé's goal, losing 1-0 as Bafétimbi Gomis scored his 20th goal in the league, the hosts confirming 5th place and European football for next season in the process. Dijon, on the other team near the bottom of the table, recorded a scoreless draw at Toulouse, although not for a lack of trying, as Mauro Goicoechea in for Alban Lafont had to make several fine saves. Lyon hosted Nice in Alexandre Lacazette's final match, and the departing striker duly obliged the crowd with a fine double in a 3-3 draw, although Anastanis Donis may have usurped Lacazette by equalising that and drawing a penalty. Champions Monaco played a rotated side, but still had enough to win 3-2 at Rennes, with youngster Adam Diakabi scoring both goals for the hosts. Meanwhile, at Lille, Nicolas de Préville scored a hat-trick to lead the hosts to a 3-0 win over Nantes. In other matches, Angers beat Montpellier 2-0, while Metz lost 1-0 at Guingamp. In Ligue 2, all 6 sides in the hunt for promotion won on Friday, although none in more dramatic fashion than Amiens, who played into the 6th minute of stoppage time, and 10-man Reims before finding a winner to clinch second place, dropping Troyes, who had themselves battled back from 2-0 down to win 3-2 at Sochaux, into the playoff spot. Elsewhere, Strasbourg recorded a fairly routine win to take the title and a return to Ligue 1 after a decade away, while Lens, Brest and Nimes all played well enough to win, but will have to wait another year for promotion. The playoffs set for Thursday and Sunday will thus see Lorient taking on Troyes, with the Coupe de France final set for Saturday between Angers and Paris Saint-Germain. And that's all the news. But remember, for all the latest, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. So before we begin, it's time to introduce who will be joining me for tonight. And we have GFFN's very own Philippe Bargil for this first hour of broadcast. And Eric Devin will be with us throughout the evening. So we're going to start our roundup of 2016-17 season at Lyon. And Eric, while there was some success, at least in Europe, it was probably an overall frustrating season for Lyon, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Lyon had some really bright spots. I think that the ambition show by signing Memphis Depay is a positive sign for the future. If Lyon can continue to sign a player of this caliber or this value over subsequent windows, I think they can be, if not on equal footing with the likes of PSG and Monaco, at least make themselves a clear favorite for third place going forward. I think that Nice are going to have a pretty tumultuous summer, and that Lyon do have the opportunity to do that. I think that there's also positives to be taken from the way some young players have come into the team, Luka Tousart and Muhtar Diakabi. I remember seeing Diakabi play at the 2015 Under-19 championships, and he really looked a prospect at that point. And he's really come on leaps and bounds. He still has a bit of a cultish play about him. He likes to run around. He likes to get about. He likes to clear the ball. That sometimes he's a little lacking positionally, but still, for his age, I think he's a really wonderful prospect. Luka Tousart looks a real find in midfield as well. I think that he's a natural successor to Maxime Gonalon, with a little bit less prosaic. He's more dynamic with the ball at his feet, and he's got a better range of passing, I think. So well done. Again, Lyon's academy continues to produce impressive players. I think that's been really good. I think Emmanuel Mamana, signed from Argentina, looks a real prospect. He's definitely struggled with some injury issues this season, but I think in he and Diakabi, there's really the makings of a center back partnership for the future. Mamana, as opposed to Diakabi, is a more composed player. He's got a good range of passing. He's very good on the ball. He's not doesn't seem a nervous player. So definitely some good signs for Lyon. Alexander Lacazette had another great season. Nothing to take away from him. Given the injuries that he suffered this season, I think in terms of goals per minute, he's set a new career high. So well done. And in the Europa League semifinal, beating Roma along the way, I think given the financial disparity between those two clubs, I think that's also a real mark of quality for Lyon too. So those are the good things. But there's also, unfortunately, some bad things. Lyon's defense, I think, is probably the thing that worries me the most. If you look at the defensive table, that is the top 5 teams in defense, they are 4 of the top 5, and I bet you can guess which one is not. That's Lyon. They were only 10th in goals conceded in Ligue 1, and that's the thing. And we saw that at the weekend. That was, in a lot of ways, a microcosm of Lyon's season, that they were able to score with aplomb, and Lacazette had some great finishes. Also in attack, Matthew Balbuena had a good season. Memphis Depay looked decent in flashes, but their defense lets them down too often. On the night, it was Nicolas Nkulu with a poor back pass and then conceding a penalty to Donis in stoppage time to drop 2 points. And it's just frustrating to see that Lyon have all the attacking tools to compete on equal or even better footing than the likes of Nice, but their defense is so poor, and that really holds them back. And that's something that's extended to other players in the team as well. I think that we've been able to ring up all of the defenders, but also Maxime Gonalon at times as being really lacking in terms of their defensive duty. And it's been frustrating to see because a lot of these players, particularly Gonalon, Nkulu, Mapuyanga Mbiwa, Morel, Jallet, they're experienced players. And there's not really an excuse for that at this point. I mean, Morel is not an international, but he's certainly been of a good standard at Ligue 1 for a long time. Machis Ribis, who was brought in the summer as another left back option, was poor throughout the season. Jallet, Yanga, and Biwa, each have a good amount of caps to their name as well. And you just expect better. I know that some of these players are getting on. Morel and Jallet are 32 and 33 respectively, so they're not exactly spring chickens anymore. Nkulu's form's tailed off quite a bit, but there has to be more from Lyon defensively if they want to succeed, and that's what it is that is driving Lacazette to leave. I mean, you can't blame him that if he scores a brace and the team draw 3-3. I mean, he has to be metaphorically pulling his hair out. That he's in the prime of his career. He's about to turn 26. Why would he want to stay at a team who can't evince any solidity defensively? And again, obviously Samuel Umtiti going to Barcelona and succeeding. Some pundits in Spain have had him in their team of the season. He's done really well there, kicking on from a solid European championship. But it's not as if Lyon didn't make an attempt to try and replace these players. It's just things didn't work out. And if he doesn't see future, if he doesn't see ambition for Lyon, as Maxime Gonalon recently said, then that you have to wonder what the point is of staying with this club if they can't make themselves regular contenders for the Champions League. Now, obviously, Nice's excellent season has made this somewhat awkward for Lyon. But again, given their resources, given their means, they should be giving Nice more of a battle for third. And it's down to that defense. I mean, think about some of the matches they've lost, say 3-2 or 2-1, or they've gone ahead and then come back to lose. It's frustrating to see that time and again. And there's been rumors of managerial change. I think that needs to happen. I think Bruno Genesio doesn't have what it takes tactically, and he doesn't have what it takes personnel-wise. I think some of the personnel choices he's made, starting Nabil Fekir at striker with any regularity, I don't see that as being something sustainable. This club are in for a major restructuring. They're going to lose Lacazette. They're likely going to lose Tolisso. They could lose Gonalon. They could lose Balbuena. And I think that whoever comes in is going to need to be the caliber of manager that's going to demand the respect of and who's going to attract players of an international caliber of the level of Depay. Now I know Depay's been hit and miss, but in terms of what he achieved with PSV and being a Dutch international, that's the caliber of player that Lyon need to pursue. And if that's the case, they're going to need a manager that is going to attract players like that. Now, Jean-Michel Aulas has come out in recent times, and he's been very strong in his praise for Genesio, saying that he wants him to be with the club. Now, he can be with the club. He can be an assistant. He's been with the club for more than a decade. But in terms of being a tactical manager, being the one who's making the decisions on the pitch, who's part of that decision-making process in terms of transfers, I don't think that Genesio has what it takes. I think that Lyon had a decent season when it comes to Europe. Again, the Champions League was tough. Sevilla in the form there in the first half of the season, and Juventus. I think that aside from away to Sevilla, they played they played 3 of those 4 matches really tough. They gave a good acquittal of themselves, and in beating Roma, they showed that they're of a European caliber of team. But for the defense, and we saw it again against Ajax in the semifinal. Ajax were the better team over 2 legs. They deserved to go through. But that was down to Lyon's defense, because it wasn't as if they weren't creating opportunities. In the first leg, Onana, the Ajax goalkeeper, had a handful of good saves. We could be looking at Lyon in a European final this Thursday if their defense had been a little bit sharper. And again, it's frustrating to see that given the attacking gifts they have. But all in all, I think that should be cautious optimism for Lyon going forward after this season. That the Chinese investment and what that's going to allow Aulas to do in the transfer market is a positive. I think that they can achieve some level of consistency after some rougher seasons in terms of their ability to bring players in. But the defense needs to be fixed first and foremost. So whether that's through a new manager or whether that's through player acquisition, it needs to be priority number 1. I think even more than replacing Lacazette or Tolisso, because there's a decent amount of attacking options in that side as it is. But without a defense to back it up, Lyon aren't going to improve in any meaningful way going forward.
Yeah. Would you say this season was a better season or worse season than last season?
Good question.
I think a better season. I say that because I have a lot of faith in the youngsters that are coming through. Toussaint, I think, is a future French international. He's a really tremendous player, so much poise for players 20 years old. And I think that Diakabi and Mamana are a center-back pairing of the future. Now, and I know that might fly a little bit in the face of what I just said in terms of needing to improve the defense. Do I have enough faith in a 21-year-old, being starting center-backs next season? It could work. I mean, Toulouse had a great defense with a fairly young pair of players in Issa Diop and Christopher Julien. But I think that needs to be Lyon's focus. I think it's a better season because I think there's more reason for optimism. I mean, last season also, the Champions League, I don't have a problem with Lyon's Champions League being eliminated from the Champions League this year. Juventus and Sevilla are strong. I mean, Juventus, we've seen them, mow through opponents in the knockout rounds. We know just how good this team is. And Sevilla at that point in time, I know they weren't great against Leicester, but again, seeing them at that point in the season before fatigue had started to become an issue, they were incredible. So no frustration there. But last season, being eliminated from that group with Zenit and Valencia and Ghent, and there was no excuse for that. I think this is a better season. I think Lyon have more to look forward to now than they did a year ago.
Because you actually achieved, Lyon, was supposed to be neutral.
I'm neutral.
Lyon actually achieved more points this season than last, which is quite amazing. And it's almost like Lyon kept to the same mediocre levels than last season, but it's just that Ligue 1 was just so much better this season. Or whilst it's at Monaco and it's just up their level so much more, and that Lyon stayed at the same level, which is not, that bad, but it just means how well, and we're probably going to talk about it later, how great seasons Monaco and Nice have had, just better than Lyon. because otherwise Lyon would have finished second, far behind PSG, just like last season. So it's not really. I don't really think it's any of Genesio's wrongdoing. It's maybe it's as far as he can take this club, and which probably means that Lyon do need a change, because not seeing Lyon in the top three is kind of strange.
Well, I mean, so why is he starting Nicolas Nkulu, who's been horrible all season?
Well,
in important matches, but that's his choice.
Yeah,
I'm not praising him.
On Lyon, let's very quickly mention the player that we mentioned in the news as well, Eric. That Alexandre Lacazette is obviously leaving. It looks possibly like it's Atletico Madrid. Should a transfer ban not really interrupt that transfer? How important has he been for Lyon, and what a great way to finish it with 100 league goals as well?
Yeah, I think that he's been an incredible player, an incredible servant. He's continued to improve even this season in terms of his defensive work rate, in terms of his passing. Thinking about that home leg at Roma, I mean, he was, that was potentially the best performance I've ever seen from a Lyon player, or at least it's deserving of consideration. He's become a more complete forward, and he's not just. I think. We have the meme Penna Lacazette, that he scores a lot of penalty goals, and he does. But at the same time, he's also become a more complete player, willing to play teammates in. I mean, it's no coincidence that players like Depay and players like Valbuena relish having a player like Lacazette as a teammate, because he's going to look for his, but he's also willing to set people up and to allow players to cut inside and to drop back and to drop deep and create space. He's a complete center forward, and at this point in time, that's a really impressive progression from a player who was perhaps somewhat of a poacher earlier in his career. So he's really, I think, taken on a leadership role, whereas when he was coming through, there were other players to do that. There was a Chris, there was even Alessandro Lopez that took on more of a leadership role in the team. But I think that even if he's not wearing the armband, he's looked to as a role model for his fellow attackers, and that's something that's really impressive as well. So. As a Lyon fan, I'll put my Lyon fan hat here on for a second. They've been absolutely tremendous. He's been a great servant for the club. I'll always have a soft spot for him. I think that he gave the club probably even an extra season more than he necessarily should have, and it led them to a great couple of nights in Europe in terms of beating Roma and beating Besiktas. So, well done to him, and may he have a good career, continue to be a French international going forward.
What do you make of the club he's being linked with?
Yeah, it'd be an interesting one.
If Griezmann stays, he and Griezmann are, that's a scary duo. I think that's really going to make Atletico a very, very good team going forward.
Yeah, and not mentioning Lyon fans, but Ligue 1 fans will miss him as well, I think. But we'll move on to the next team now, and that we introduced that with our first guest, and that's French football writer Rich Allen. Hello, Rich.
Good evening.
And we wouldn't have anyone talking about any other team really than your beloved Rennes, and it's been like we mentioned a few weeks ago, not the greatest of seasons, but since then you've had the Giovanni Sio header that was a little bit strange, and you pushed a Monaco side for a little bit of the weekend, but that's probably all you can really highlight this season, other than a couple of bright youngsters, isn't it, for Rennes? It's been a strange one.
It's been an incredibly frustrating season. It's another. I mean, this is copy-paste for most seasons recently. It's another season of what if for Rennes. There's a lot of potential there, but once again, really have failed to fulfill it.
So let's focus on sort of the positives at least then. And we've mentioned the likes of Yoris Gnagnon in the past, but Diakabe scored 2 at the weekend as well. Is there maybe some positive signs that finally, again, that the youth system is maybe producing something of note, at least in a season that's been a bit drab, maybe to say the least?
I think so. I think when I was on a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that one of my hopes for next season is a bigger reliance on the youth team. They performed very successfully at CFA level, won their division. Diakabe started the season brightly, came really from nowhere. Some really good performances, got on the score sheet, finished the season 2 goals against Monaco, another bright performance. Very hit and miss in between, but was never really given a consistent run in the team. But without a shadow of a doubt, star of the season for Rennes. and one of the standout players in the league this season was Joris Gnagnon. Unbelievable performances week in, week out. For someone so young to be marshalling that defence and to have come in and almost instantly had become the most integral part of that defence has been fantastic. So, fingers crossed we keep him in the summer and look forward to what he can perform at the level he can perform at anyway next season.
Yeah, and one that's at least confirmed to be going this summer is Benoit Costil, who is leaving at the end of his contract. But it also looks like they're looking at Lecomte as well from Lorient as a possible replacement for him. Rich, is that maybe the right step for Rennes to make, and that maybe a sign of what they can do in the summer of trying to bring in Ligue 1 experienced players to really bolster the squad again?
I think they need to look at some experience. They need to look at the right kind of experience. We've seen the likes of Clément Chanton come in, and my goodness, was he not the kind of player that Rennes need? So it's really making sure that it's the right kind of experience, the kind of experience that is actually not just almost a panic job-filling kind of role-filling kind of short-term solution. There has to be some thought into the signings, because that's been the real problem with Rennes this season. Defensively, they've been fantastic. Not many teams in the league have conceded more than Rennes, but it's the attack. The only two teams who scored less than Rennes this season were the two teams that got relegated, Bastia and Nancy. So it's the creativity in midfield. It's then the finishing as well. That's what needs to be looked at. Defensively, pretty sound. Have a first choice back four that's very strong. I think they need to replace Costil. Lecomte is a name that I've seen mentioned. Dijon at Metz is another I've seen mentioned. So there's the right kind of players being mentioned, but is Christian Gourcuff the kind of coach, who will be able to spot those opportunities and succeed in pulling them off? I'm not so sure.
Well, what is the juror's opinion on Gourcuff to the point? Because there was some kind of optimism when he was appointed, since he was some kind of a local guy, and by local he was from Brittany. I mean, has it died down, or are people still quite excited by his run of football, his experience? Because it seems to have gone into some kind of monotony, somewhat.
The excitement has disappeared completely, I think. It sadly sort of disappeared quite quickly as well. I think the turning point sort of came towards the end of November. We had a pretty torrid December. Winter break came about, and then pretty much from January onwards, it's just been a steady, consistent level of underperforming. So certainly at fan level, supporter level, there's big concern over whether Christian Gourcuff is the man to continue taking Rennes forward. At board level, I think he's got relatively decent support still. I think he's always going to have the players on board. He's very good at managing the players. So I think that there's a lot of support still there. It's just what influence, I suppose, the fan dissatisfaction can bring about.
Sorry,
carry on, Rich.
Are you given how anemic this team's been offensively, especially since selling the likes of Grosicki and Intep in the winter? Is relegation at all a concern next year, or do you feel that there'll be sufficient investment in the summer to allay those fears?
There will be sufficient investment. I'm not concerned about relegation next season. I'm concerned that it's going to be a far dicier season than this season. I think we were very fortunate that sort of that November period we actually performed really quite well, and sort of flirting with 4th and 5th for a while. So no, I think there's enough in the squad. I don't think there's too many players that will be departing this summer. I think Costil is obviously a huge, massive loss, but that's been on the cards now for quite a few months that he was going. I wish they hadn't mucked around Paul Nardi by bringing him in last summer. It was obviously a with the intention that Costil was going to leave last summer. That never happened. So Nardi didn't get his opportunity. Terminated the loan deal. He's now gone and he's performed by all accounts very well in Belgium. So I think his experience and very bad experience with the club means we're not going to look at bringing him back, which is a shame because he would have been a great solution. No, in short, no, I don't fear relegation next season. I think we are going to be better than a decent number of teams and enough teams that mean relegation won't be an issue. But yeah, I think it's not going to be a pretty season. As with seemingly the last 4 or 5 seasons, it's going to be another season of transition, I think.
It's maybe one of those years where they really take things back and sort of restock and see where to go from there. Thank you, Rich, for joining us and again going through the traumatic experience of what was a 2016-17 season again, and we shall see you sometime.
I'll be off to see my therapist.
Yeah, and we shall talk to you next season. Thank you again. Let's move on now to another team, another team that's had a middling season, really, and that's Lille, Philip. They've had an interesting product check that seems to be coming in, and Gerard Lopez and Bielsa next season. But this year was a tough one to start off with. They struggled to score goals, and they've sort of limped ever since then, and they've been a bit unexciting is probably the best way to put them, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you can describe Lille's season a bit very much like Rennes, except that there's so much more, shall we say, expectation and enthusiasm around the club for Lille, and that given that they've now got this brand new stadium, a wonderful stadium. I mean, the fans did expect much better this season, but the investment did come. Lille were actually 19th at the end of November, and they were never actually. I think they were only only once in the top half, and that was on the opening day of the season. So this pretty much tells you everything you need to know about their season. But investment has been made. Bielsa is coming over. Bielsa is actually being unveiled. I think it was today or maybe in the next days. Franck Plessy is not going to be the manager anymore. It's going to be Bielsa with all the success, even though it is short-term success. But he will. Everybody's confident he will bring success to this side. So they've got some cash. They've got some decent players. I mean, I did enjoy Lille play at some point, and I do believe that some of the players, Mounir Obadi, named Titi Cheka, and your very own Nicolas Depréville-Nathan have been quite good. But it's just that they a bit like I'm seeing a bit like Mamana at Lyon. They just need the time to adapt to the new league, and that we'll see how good they are next season. It's just I think it's a transitional one, and that they'll have a pretty good season next term, and maybe even the year after that. But of course, I mean, we are talking about Bielsa, but I think we can expect Lille to be in some kind of decent form next season. So not good. It's not been good. It's really not been good. But good expectations.
Yeah, and I suppose the hope for next season is that they don't have a winter window where they have to sign everyone on the final day of the season, and then it gets struggled up. And it's like, has that been a problem really for them to sort of connect the dots together in that second half of the season to get those players running? I mean, you've mentioned Xhaka briefly there, who's impressed in bits, but the likes of there's been Krishna and Elzar as well from Ajax. They've not really gelled as well, at least lit the stadium alight as many hope they would have there.
Yeah, and also I think it's not just them. I think there's also the likes of Boutier, Mavuba, and Eder, who was quite good at the end of last season. To put it mildly, it just didn't help. I mean, it's not like they had a lot of players being actually, shall we say? I mean, the body language wasn't very very welcoming. I felt, and you could feel that something was wrong in that place. And I think there's quite a lot of work to do for Bielsa, but given his method and his strictness, I think he can get results fairly quickly. I certainly expect Lille to finish higher than where they are right now, which is 11th.
It'll be an interesting summer, at least in the northern city, when they maybe splash a little bit more cash. But another guest joining us now is a French freelance writer, Jonathan Johnson. Thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Hey there, guys. Thanks for having me on.
So we're talking about, obviously, Paris Saint-Germain and what many seem as a strange season. They've won the Coupe de la Ligue. They're in the Coupe de France final, but a pretty embarrassing defeat in the Champions League and obviously finishing second in the league. Is that a disappointing season, as strange as it might be to say for them, or are we maybe overanalyzing what they should be achieving?
I think that for PSG's Qatari owners, finishing second obviously is a massive disappointment. But I think, for people like you and I, when we're looking at the situation for PSG in Ligue 1 and, sort of from the outside, it should actually be viewed as a positive that they do have competition now that's able to push them and punish them for being complacent and making mistakes. I think that this should be viewed as a positive thing by PSG. I understand why they won't see it as a positive thing at this time, but I don't think that they would have gained anything. And I don't think that they would make the changes necessary that, the changes that they really need to make this summer, had they just managed to scrape the league title because Monaco made a few mistakes in the last couple of games of the season. I think that this now is a wake-up call for PSG. They've been trying to reinvigorate this stagnating project now for the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and this is the real sort of kick in the arse that they need to actually make sure that this happens this summer.
Yeah, and talking about the previous summer at least, and that's maybe where some of the negativity comes from. There's not been too much help from the summer signings, other than maybe Thomas Meunier can sort of get away with that. Was that a major issue in why they really struggled without the depth behind that starting 11?
I think the problem that PSG have had now for the last couple of seasons is there's no clear roles for a lot of the people at the club, particularly off the pitch, not so much on it. I think that PSG have really been lacking direction for the last couple of years since Leonardo left, really, and the changes that needed to be made on the pitch, because they didn't have to be that significant after they failed to beat City in the Champions League quarterfinals last season. And I think the most galling thing for PSG is, yes, this has been a disappointing season in terms of Ligue 1 and the Champions League, but the most disappointing thing still when they think about the Champions League, I don't think will be the humiliation they suffered in Barcelona this season. I think it's the fact that they didn't beat City when they really should have, the season before. I think it was, it was the perfect opportunity for PSG. A lot of players were at their absolute peak, the likes of Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and they messed up that chance. And I think that will still gnaw away at PSG. And I think it's certain things that needed to be taken care of last summer weren't, and those things really need to be addressed this summer. Patrick Kluivert's come in, essentially taken over the sporting director role. Olivier Letang, had a token sporting director title, but essentially did nothing for the last couple of months of his time at PSG. And Kluivert is the guy calling the shots at this moment in time. But it's quite telling that aside from Alexis Sanchez, who PSG still seem to be pushing ahead and trying to pursue, that Kluivert's not been told to go after any other targets, because it sounds like PSG are very close to replacing him with either Andrea Berta from Atletico Madrid or Antero Henrique, who was a sporting director at Porto a couple of years ago. So it sounds like PSG see that as the first piece of the jigsaw, and then they can start taking care of, some of the changes they need to make on the pitch. And yes, there are more changes needed on the pitch now than there were last year, but those changes were never going to happen without bigger changes happening behind the scene. And it only seems like PSG are waking up to the fact that those changes need to be made now.
Seems to me like...
Sorry. Go ahead, Eric.
What about Unai Emery? He had his moments in terms of the victory over Barcelona, but the frustration in the league, does he get to keep his job, or is this just, in terms of this caliber of player, is this a bridge too far for him?
I see why people would make an argument to say that he's not cut out for coaching PSG, but I think the other argument is how can we really judge Emery when it feels like he's not really been able to cut loose in the job just yet? He hasn't really been able to stamp his mark on the team in the way that he'd like to. Everyone was expecting PSG to play 4-2-3-1 when he arrived. They did for the first couple of months, although that was mostly pre-season. And after a couple of games of the new season, it turned into 4-3-3, and it seemed like a lot of those over-coddled players got their way again. And the 4-3-3 formation in every match, home and away, didn't work. What would have been nicer would have been to see sort of a balance between the two. Maybe play 4-2-3-1 away from home, be more attacking, and play that 4-3-3 possession-based game, at home where they can beat players on their own patch. I mean, I can see why PSG wouldn't want to get rid of Emery. And I can see why they would as well. But I think it's better for them to stick with him at this moment in time, because unless they could say to, a real top quality coach, and by that, I'm sort of talking about your Simeones, your Mourinhos, your Guardiolas, essentially coaches who aren't going to come to PSG at this moment in time, unless you could say to one of them that they're going to get absolutely everything they want, they agree to take over the job, and then it's up to PSG to either push Emery out in order to make space for them, or let Emery go somewhere like Roma. There have been lots of rumours that Monchi would really like him there. Aside from that happening, I don't see how PSG could really afford to sack Emery at this moment in time, because if they do that and then have to go on another search for a coach, 12 months or less after they appointed Emery, which coach in their right mind is going to take that job on? Because there just seems to be no security there.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask, sorry, briefly, Philip, is do you feel that the role that player power has continued to have at this club is something that would potentially put off a top-level manager like a Simeone or like a Mourinho?
I don't think so, because I think characters like Mourinho and Simeone sort of relish, winning over those sorts of characters. I don't think that would put them off too much. In fact, I think it would more put off some of the players that might have experienced, those two as coaches in the past. I'm thinking of the likes of, Di Maria, who played at Real Madrid under Mourinho. I think that player power is an issue at PSG. But I think it's only an issue because PSG have had some coaches who in the past, have taken a long time before they really win the players' respect. It took Blanc, into his second season, before he had that moment where he, absolutely flipped out in the dressing room away at Saint-Etienne, where the players really sort of sat up and took notice and sort of started to respect him. And I don't think Emery's had that moment yet. Yes, he inspired them to beat Barcelona 4-0. But, I think that was one of the rare moments of where all the players were pulling in the same direction, working for the same cause, which is something that doesn't happen often enough on a sort of weekly basis for PSG, particularly in the Ligue. So I think PSG's biggest problem at the moment is that not enough of the players in the squad take Ligue 1 seriously enough. Yes, there's been other issues that have contributed towards Emery having a difficult debut season. It didn't help that he came into his first campaign as PSG coach off the back of a grueling summer where most of the squad had either played in the Euros or played in Copa America. And they've also come up against a fantastic Monaco side. Can't take anything away from Monaco this season. PSG didn't essentially lose the league because they were crap. Monaco won it because they deserved to win it. PSG have finished with their second greatest points total in Ligue 1 history. So yes, although there have been some real disappointing moments for Emery, he's still come back with quite an impressive points haul overall.
Well, I believe that the guy who's under most pressure at this moment in time is more Nasser El Khelaifi than Emery. I can't really fathom him at any moment this summer where Unai will be given the boot, because Nasser has had so much criticism being blamed at him, and it all came back to the Serge Aurier gate being mentioned once again this season after the guy actually took 10 minutes to put on a pair of shorts. It's just everybody was absolutely flabbergasted that a club has so many great ambition. I mean, the greatest ambition of any European football club to behave like this. And that's not exactly Emery's fault. Nasser's more finger pointed in that respect than Emery. So I really don't see. I just don't see him being sacked. And also, we've got to remember that PSG did achieve 96 points in that last season, which is a point more than Monaco's this season. So they actually had more points than Monaco's this season, which is extremely hard to believe. And that PSG actually, not in the Champions League, but PSG peaked domestically. They peaked in the Coupe de la Ligue. They peaked in the Coupe de France. They peaked in Ligue 1, best season of the club. They scored almost as many goals as Monaco did this season, and it's very, very hard for any manager, even the best in the world, to tell the players who have had a great season, who've achieved almost everything aside from beating Manchester City, to get to work and try harder than last season, which is which even Monaco didn't achieve. So very difficult one for Unai. And I'm positive that next one will be, if he's still there, and I hope he is, that next one will be easier on him.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with those points. I think that Al Khalifi should be under more pressure than he is at the moment. I think, unfortunately for PSG in that respect, QSI will never trust somebody who's not Qatari with owning PSG. So essentially, Al Khalifi stays in his position by default because, based on results that PSG have had over the last couple of seasons, particularly this one, Emery would be out, in any other sort of a similar position. But because of PSG's unique ownership scenario, I think that keeps him in a job, unless, of course, QSI and the Emir of Qatar, get pally with somebody else who they find, potentially acceptable alternative, and they bring him in instead. But I don't see that happening, despite the rumors of, bringing in, the crazy rumors of somebody like Sarkozy coming in. I don't think somebody who is not Qatari by birth, will ever be trusted with the reins at PSG. So Al Khalifi, I think, is going to be in it for the duration. Another thing that I would say in Emery's defence as well, I completely agree with you. It's very, very difficult to sort of follow in Laurent Blanc's shoes after last season, where essentially the two games that PSG messed up were the two against Manchester City that really counted. Otherwise, they were absolutely excellent domestically, and as you said, probably better than Monaco were this season. I just think it's such a novelty. That's why people are celebrating this Monaco success in the way that they are. I'm not saying that it doesn't deserve to be celebrated. I think it does. It's a fantastically well assembled side, very, very exciting, very vibrant. But at the same time, you're right. If you do compare the two seasons that PSG and Monaco had, PSG last season, Monaco this season, PSG's last season was more impressive overall, but at the same time, the reason why it was so impressive was because they didn't have a strong Monaco like this one, to go head to head with in Ligue 1 and both domestic cups. But one other thing I wanted to say in defense of Emery is that something he has done, which I think is very important for PSG moving forward, whether they keep Emery in position or not, is that he has started to bleed in some of the players from the youth academy. And okay, perhaps it's still not quite enough for many people who look at how many fantastic youth academy graduates PSG produce, every season. But the fact that, it's not just Rabiot sort of being the token youth academy representative there anymore. Kimpembe is a serious alternative to likes of Marquinhos and Silva in defence. Now, Areola, yes, he had a very difficult first season as a senior squad player at PSG this term. However, I do believe that he still has something to offer PSG. Then you've got some other players sort of knocking on the door. Okay, the situation with Augustin is disappointing, but he still has picked up minutes here and there under Emery, even if he, arguably should have been given more. And Nkunku, I think, has been one of the quiet revelations of the season for PSG. I found it frustrating at times that it seems like where he's had a really good performance, he's then being dropped from the squad for the next game. But, there are small signs of positivity that PSG need to not content themselves with this summer, but look at, when they're weighing up Emery's position, I think.
Yeah, it's been an interesting one for PSG. It seems strange to say winning a cup, getting to a final, and being in a Champions League and coming second with 87 points seems like a failure. But that's sometimes how it goes when you've got so much money. But thank you, Jonathan, for joining us again, and it's great talking to you. And we'll talk to you hopefully again next season. Thanks again for having me on, guys. Pleasure, and I'll speak to you soon. We move on now to the champions and another guest straight into it, and that's French football writer Robin Bernard. Great to have you on the show, Robin.
Hi guys, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. And like I said, we'll go on to the champions after second place has already gone out of the way. And it's been a absolutely sensational season, really, to make shorts of it. Monaco, they got to the Coupe de la Ligue final, semis of the Coupe de France, semis of the Champions League, and obviously a Liga winners' medal in what is one of the most stylish fashions of any league this season. How incredible has this season been for them?
I think it's difficult to overstate just how good Monaco have been this season. Picking up 95 points, as you say, is an incredible achievement. It's the second most points that any team has ever picked up in Ligue 1, behind Paris Saint-Germain's 96 last year. But I think what's been most impressive is, as you said, the style they've achieved it in. They've played, a really breathtaking brand of football. They've shown a capability to break down all kinds of different defences, and they've been able to face up against all kinds of different challenges over the course of the season. And to score over 100 goals, it's the third most number of goals that any team's ever scored in a Ligue 1 season. It's really been quite incredible. It's really put Ligue 1 on the map, and I think one of the most impressive things about it is the style and the fact that they've managed to transition from really what was quite a dour defensive team that got to the Champions League quarter-finals a couple of years ago, and as you say, they've now been one of Europe's most exciting teams to watch.
Yeah, and I wrote an article the other week just after their title celebrations, and researching it, seeing that they scored 157 goals this season, and that's 7 more goals than the 2 campaigns before that combined, which is absolutely incredible. But there's so many great young players in that squad as well. You go for the likes of Fabinho, Bernardo Silva, Lamar, Mbappe is the clear, obvious favourite, but out of all of them, and it is a difficult question to answer, and that's why I ask it, Robin, but who's been the best player for them this season, or maybe the most influential?
I think if you look at it over the course of the whole season, I think you have to go with Bernardo Silva. Obviously, Mbappe since Christmas has won so many headlines because he's been absolutely sensational. However, Bernardo Silva has been the guy who's been there throughout the whole campaign. He's been the guy that's really dictated so much of the play. He's an absolute artist to watch. He's such a classy player, a brilliant technician in the midfield. He's capable of opening up defences. He doesn't rely on pace or power. He's a really intelligent footballer. He's one of these guys that neutrals just want to see on the ball all the time because of his poise on it. He looks so stylish, and he looks like he could fit into just about any team in the world. So although Mbappe's grabbed so many headlines, I think Bernardo Silva has to be their man of the season.
And we're word on the manager as well, who's, like you mentioned, had a particularly defensive style when he came into Ligue 1. And in the 3 years he's been here, it's sort of slowly moulded into this attacking style. And you rate a great piece on him before a Champions League game, I remember, Robin. And Jardim has really sort of galvanised this young team. And you can see in the title celebrations as well how much he means to them as well. Can he stay long term, or is he clearly one of these next managers in line to get a real top job?
When he first came to Monaco, he did say that he wanted to play with an attacking style. However, I don't know if you remember his first couple of games. I think his second game he went to Bordeaux, and I think they got beaten 4-0 or 4-1. He played and was just so incredibly naive. It was just attack. It was brainless attacking, and they got picked off so easily. And it was after that they really sort of regressed into the defensive style, which obviously suited them at the time. But he's obviously been a manager who's always wanted to play in an attacking way, but perhaps hasn't been able to quite right until this season. And I think a long-term future in Monaco, like for the players, is probably quite difficult because there's a bit of a glass ceiling there, perhaps because of the way the club's going to progress. I think you can see them becoming more of a sort of Porto-style club where they can perhaps get to the quarter-finals of the Champions League, the last 16 of the Champions League on a regular basis. But I think it's very difficult to be able to buy low and sell high and be very successful. I think ultimately he's going to get frustrated by that. And if he doesn't go this summer, it might be next summer or the year after that. But, his achievements have been incredible, and he certainly deserves an opportunity at one of the best clubs in Europe.
Yeah, and he's certainly created an attacking style of football that really has been pleasing on the eye. But let's talk very quickly about sort of the future of Monaco, and that's the speculation. There's links to every single player, to every club in Europe, it almost seems. But let's hope, from a sort of Ligue 1 perspective, what do you think it would class as the best summer for Monaco? We'll make it a little bit easier in saying that someone has to go, but what will class as their best summer they could possibly have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best summer that they're going to have is one where they sell as few of their players as possible. I mean, they've already said that they want to keep Jardim. That's their priority, even above keeping Mbappe. They can keep Jardim and Mbappe, and if they can keep the core of the team, I mean, I think we'll definitely see a few players go. Sidibé, I think, is likely to go. I understand that he was in Monaco on the promise that he could leave after a season if he had a successful season. So it wouldn't be a surprise for me if he left. Bakayoko, I think, will go. I think he'll go to the Premier League. But I actually think he's probably one of their more dispensable players in the midfield. So, you know, if they could limit the damage to maybe losing only 3 or maybe 4 players, I think they'd have to consider that quite successful. It sounds like they're going to get Yuri Tielemans in from Anderlecht, who's a player that's had a lot of good things said about him. Monaco are probably just about an ideal club for him to go to at the moment at his stage in his career. If they can keep the core of the team, introduce another 2 or 3 high-quality young players, I think Monaco will be pretty content with their season, or with their summer, sorry.
Yeah, and just hoping that not too many vultures end up circling in the summer. That's the worry. Thank you, Robin, for joining us again, and hopefully speak to you again next season.
No problem, man. Absolute pleasure.
We move on now to a side that sort of flitted between relegation and not being in the relegation fight, and that's Montpellier, Eric. And they've had flattered to deceive sometimes this season. Sometimes they've looked excellent against the likes of Marseille at home, and we all remember the PSG game where they won 3-0. But other times they've really struggled against sides in those relegation places around them. What do you make of their season?
I think it's a positive. I think I was frustrated when they got rid of Hans to bring in Jean-Louis Gasset in January. But at the time, they were in the relegation zone, and it was something they needed to do. Gasset righted the ship. He got them on a good run and got them to avoid relegation. Ended up being a little bit closer towards the end of the season, but they did get enough points to get over the line. But this is a team that has evolved positively this season. They have finally spent a little bit of money. The sale of Sanson allowed them to bring in some players that I think are fairly exciting in the winter window. I think that you look at the likes of Benza, Nori Mukiele, and Lucas Bacorni are all players that are on the younger side of things. I think Bacorni's 23, and the other 2 are 19 or 20. So this is a team that's rejuvenating itself. I think that, which I think is a good thing. I think that if you look at players like Hilton, Daniel Congre, Suleiman Kamara, Anthony Vandenborg, who they brought in the summer and didn't work out, to be charitable, the goalkeeping situation, I think that they have relied for a long time on a lot of these veteran players, and they're maybe perhaps less likely to make a mistake. But again, time is the indefatigable opponent, and I think the Montpellier were in a sore need of a freshening up, and I think that they've made the right moves to do this. And Mukiele, in particular, I think is he's a French youth international, exactly the right kind of player. Jonathan Akone on loan from PSG. If they can get him in again next season, I think would be great. He's looked really bright. And then Steve Mounier, I think, has been absolutely the revelation this season for this club, scoring 14 goals. He's won more headers than any player in the league. He's got, he's 6'3", he's big, but he's got good movement. He's able to play in players as well. He's, sometimes his passing doesn't come off, but the fact that he tries to be creative and link play, I think is important. Again, for a first season in Ligue 1, I think he's done fantastically well. So there's a lot to look forward to for this team going forward. Elias Shaqiri in central midfield has come from the academy as well, and he's really impressed. It looks like Boudebouz will be off in the summer, but I think Montpellier can ride that out. I think that they look really good with the younger players they brought in. And to avoid relegation, being up against it, having to sell, selling Sanson in the winter and having to sell in the summer as well, they're always going to be sort of behind the eight ball, if you will. I mean, they sold, Sahi, Martin, Dabo, important players in the midfield were sold as well. They lost Bensebaini, who eventually ended up at Rennes. So they were forced to make moves to get rid of players, but they've ridden that out, and credit to them. My concern for this team right now, though, is Michel Deserkarian, who has been appointed the manager. He's come from Rennes and he's back in Ligue. Now, he did what he did at Nantes with limited means. He kept the Canaries in Liga. Job done. I give him credit for that. But he did it with a really negative style, relying on attack-minded fullbacks in Sissoko and Bessat, and were not fun to watch. And I do. So, Montpellier had done well to stay in the league. I do worry about them a little bit next year. Boudebouz looks set to go. Lyon have been linked. And I think at this point in his career, he's 27, 26. He deserves to go. He deserves to take a step up and test himself in European football. He's been a good servant for the club. I think it's his best season so far. But I worry about Derzakarian and his persona and his negative football undoing the good work that Montpellier have done. I think that a lot of the younger players they brought in, even Nicolas Saint-Ruf, not Nicolas Saint-Ruf, he's at Bastia now. My apologies. But the young players that they've brought in, that they've Modric, Giri, Mooney, Mukiele, Bakorni, Benza, even Keegan Dolly to some extent. I know he's looked a little bit less impressive than those, but there's a good young core at Montpellier, and I worry about the potentially negative effects that a manager like Derzakarian could have on those players. I realized that Gasset was an interim solution and Hans wasn't working out, but there's got to be more positive managers out there that could come in and do a job. I mean, people have had a lot of good things to say about, say, Bernard Blachar at Nîmes. He's already in the area. He's also someone that's going to perhaps know and be familiar with players in Montpellier's catchment. And he's also endeavored to play positive football despite not having any significant amount of means, at least compared to the top clubs in Ligue 2. So there are managers out there that I think, deserve a chance with the exciting young talent Montpellier have. And I think Derzakarian, if Montpellier wants safety, they're probably going to get it. But in terms of encouraging those players to stay and to play in an attacking style, I think that you're going to see these young talents running for the exit door once they realize what life is like under Derzakarian.
I think I can resume this as there are managers that are much more worse it than Derzakarian in Ligue 1. I've been to a couple of games in Ligue 2 all season, 10 or 15 maybe, and Reims, who were managed by Derzakarian this season, were by far the most boring side to watch. I mean, very, very one-dimensional, very solid isn't even the word, because when you attacked them, it wasn't that good. And Reims finishing 7th is a huge blow for everything surrounding the club. And yeah, second those thoughts as well. That under not Derzakarian, sorry, were not great fun to watch. But saying this, I think the guy knows how to stay in Ligue 1 though. I think he knows how to manage the players, and think of him as a French Sam Allardyce, if you will.
Let's move on to a side that did struggle until the very end of the season as well, at least, and that's Caen, Philip, who seemed to save themselves against a big side again, and that goal in the very last minute has just kept them up, and that's sort of been the story of their season, hasn't it?
Yeah, I still can't get my head around it as to how this side actually stayed up. They were absolutely awful at the back. They do have a decent goalkeeper. I mean, Rémi Vercoutre is not a bad goalkeeper. He's played most of the games. He's played 34 games out of 38. Patrice Garand, he started with some kind of variation between 4-4-2 and 4-5-1. Then it was very hard at the start of the season with lots and lots of defeats. Their first real win, shall we say, came in the beginning of November against Nice, where Garand for the first time played a 5-3-2, and it was really a 5-3-2. I mean, you really had the fullbacks right next to the three centre backs, and you could do that against Nice, and yeah, it did work, but it was such a negative and such a porous defense that you just still can't really get your head around as to how they managed to stay up. There was a question, I mean, that was mean to ask. I mean, was it that PSG was too not professional enough on Saturday evening, or was it that Caen deserves the equaliser? I mean, didn't watch the whole game, so I'm not going to respond that. But it's still begged belief. I mean, when I checked out the score, I said, Caen drew at PSG. Seriously, I mean, I was expecting PSG to roll over them, but they did save. They did what they had to do. The club is needs a major rehaul though. Lots of players need to leave. Lots of the youth has to be given its chance. There are very, very reasons to be hopeful for Caen, unless you get rid of most of the deadwood and give Hughes a chance and try to be solid at the back. It's basically the best Caen can hope for. Saying this, you've got the playoff now. You've got the two promoted sides in Strasbourg and Amiens who haven't achieved a lot of points, and they'll be wary as well. So yeah.
Sorry, carry on, Philippe. Finish off your point if you like.
No, I was finished.
That's all right. That's an abrupt ending, probably perfect to introduce our next guest, and that's Lorient fan. Unfortunately for him, I suppose, Chris Carpenter. I mean, we've just mentioned the team that have sort of nudged your team into that relegation playoff. That must have been a really disappointing end to what looked like at least an upwards curve at the end of the season, but they seemed to dip just at the wrong time, didn't they?
Yeah, evening, Nathan. Thanks very much for having me, and even to everybody on the show. Yeah, I'm a very bitter man. I've got to be honest with you. I sat here and I sent a tweet out pre sort of game and said this is how I see it finishing. When I came on the show previously a few weeks back, I think I was the only person that picked Caen to drop, and I was sitting there smugly going, "Ha, I did tell you," and then it all went spectacularly wrong. But I've got a real issue with PSG. Damn you. They just seem to sort of, I just knew it was coming, and it has to be said, Caen had a perfectly good goal disallowed for offside, which should have stood, so I can't hold it against them. They did what they had to do. But as for Lorient perspective, yeah, I mean, part of me sort of kind of excited that we get the extra game, the first team in Ligue to experience this playoff game. But I'm really quite nervous now because the momentum was there to stay up. They didn't take the opportunity they were given. Bordeaux, were not brilliant on the night, but did enough. And going behind was just so crucial because I just felt if we got in front, it would have stayed probably, would have been able to get enough to grind out a result. But ultimately, it's a failing season, and they've only got themselves to blame to be in this position. And now they've got two huge, massive cup finals for the games against Troyes, and I can't say I'm confident, but I think they'll just about have enough.
In Troyes, with a disappointment really of seeming like they were going up as well automatically and getting that snatched away from them at the last moment. It might be a really interesting, disappointing weekend. Really, weekend 2 games for both of them. But that loss as well to Bastia a couple of weeks ago was the real soul crusher. But let's maybe take some positives this season. What has been positive for Lorient this season? Has there been any specific player you can pick out that's really shone at any point, or is there any? I suppose it might be difficult to say at this point, but is there something that maybe was a little bit of a leading light for them?
Yeah, this might be brief. Not really. It's the short answer. I suppose you probably look at some of the players who consistently they rely on. So I look at the 2 forwards in Waris and Makanjo. They're clearly the key men, and without them, dread to think they probably would have finished bottom by a street. It's probably been more about the disappointments of this season. I mean, I look at some of the players in that squad that I thought would kick on. You look at the likes of Jimmy Cabo's had a fairly decent season, but hasn't really kicked on from what I thought he would last season. If you Walid Mazloub has been largely, 21 games a season, hasn't really again been the player that I hoped he would be. Defensively, it's been all over the shop. I'm a really big fan of Benjamin Lecomte. I thought he was a really good up and coming goalkeeper. It's hard to believe he's now 26 and seemingly his career's gone backwards. He just seemed to be a player that, he had that injury, of course, mid-season that kept him out, but he never really looked to be the player that I thought he would be. And probably the biggest disappointment for me up front was Benjamin Jeannot. I know he was subject to a bid for Toulouse in the January window and he didn't move on. For a 25-year-old to play 17 games and not get a goal, I thought he was a player that maybe might be in the Gamera mould, a player that would never really rip up trees, but would be a consistent goal threat, and he just hasn't been at all. So I'm genuinely struggling to find a player that I can put my finger on and say, yeah, he's been pretty decent. I thought Perbenes was a decent buy at the time. He probably came in at the right time defensively. But yeah, I probably would turn the question back to you. I really can't think of any particular bright spot. Maybe Sylvain Marveau at a push, but is that really a bright spot?
Yeah, I would have to tend to concur, Chris. I think that it's been a frustrating season, that there's not been enough leadership, especially defensively. And you look at someone like Zarco Torre, I think, who's totally fallen off a cliff this season after a decent season. I think that obviously Lorient's transfer losses, likes of Ndong and Guerrero, were important players to them in the past, and they struggle a little bit to make up for those losses. But but there hasn't been enough investment for me. I mean, they have brought in a player like Wakaso, a player like Steven Moreira. I feel like that this club underinvested in terms of how much money they made in the summer. We're talking 30 million plus euro, and to not see that reinvested in a significant way, it's hard to believe that the club are in that much of a dire situation financially. They can't spend, say, half of that on players. You think given the sales we've seen in Liga, how you could get 3 very, very decent players for that amount of money, but rather than spending, say, 800,000 on a Paverness or something like that, that if they had invested in a higher caliber player, I don't think the relegation would have been a worry. And trying to do it on the cheap, I think, has gotten them into this situation. And I agree with you. I think they will go through the playoff. I don't think Troyes are up to much, especially considering how potent Lorient can be in attack. But I think it's a matter of opportunity lost in terms of the money that they had coming in the summer and how they failed to reinvest that. Maybe they wanted to take a long view of the market and they plan to spend this summer. But if they're in Ligue 2, that's probably going to be a moot point.
And I would just... Sorry, go on, Nathan.
No, I would say that's the worry. You can carry on, Chris. That's really the worry for you, isn't it? If you drop, it's just more difficult than ever, really, to get back in.
Yeah, I would argue that Eric's point is bang on there about leadership, such a key role. I seem to pick teams that lack leaders. For those who don't know, I'm an Arsenal fan, and I think our club captain has played sort of half a game in like 2 years. So I'm all about lacking leaders in the clubs I follow, and I think with Lorient it's exactly the same. It's a rudderless ship at the moment, and it strikes me that there isn't enough sort of leaders on the pitch, both defensively and even in midfield. You look at Jan Schuffer when he left. He's obviously a legend in these parts, and I'm delighted to see he had such a good season with Metz. But he was a proper captain, a proper leader, and a real sort of player that you'd look to do something special or drive on those players around him. And if you're going to bring in youth or players sort of on the cheap, you need somebody to meld them and keep them together. And we haven't had that. And I do worry that in the summer you say about what happens if they drop. To be honest, I'd be worried about what happens if they stay up, because there might be that element of, well, we went close, but we've managed to stay up. It'll all be all right in the end. there aren't many clubs, as much as it pains me to say it, worse than Lorient this season. Well, clearly, because there's only been 2 below them. And I just worry if the investment isn't there in the summer. I can't see Waris and McAndrew remaining. Certainly one of them will go in the summer, in my opinion, even if it's to a lesser team in Europe or maybe a lower Premier League side, for example. Where do the goals come from if you sell them off? And Lorient have always been a club that will sell to the highest bidder if a club comes in for one of the talented players. Fortunately, there aren't too many talented players in there at the moment, but if they do lose 1 or 2, even if they do remain, and I concur with Eric, I think they will get through the playoff just about by outscoring Twire, if nothing else. The long-term future of the club, and I don't know if you've got this written down, but specifically the manager, I think there has to be quite a big change for the club to kick on to be comfortable next season.
Yeah, and there's plenty of speculation around his future still and everything like that. Thank you, Chris, for joining us for a brief chat on Lorient, and hopefully speak to you again next season.
Yeah, pleasure anytime. Really enjoy the show, and thank you for having me on.
No problem at all. We've had a swift exit from Philip that we would have introed out if he was still here, but he's swiftly headed off. But we are joined by another expert on French football, and that's our very own Adam White. Thank you, Adam, for joining us.
Hi, Nathan. How's it going?
Really well. So we're slowly battering through these teams, and I'll throw you in the deep end straight away. And that's a team that's really had a season of 2 halves, and that's Angers. I know you're a fan of how they perform and the like, and they really struggled in that first half of the season, but they managed to pick up just about enough of form to really escape relegation in the end, or at least stay well clear of it in the end, didn't they, Adam?
Yeah, they did. I think that sort of mid part of the season, they were really, really struggling with players away at the African Nations Cup, and they were they've honestly looked like they were on the verge of relegation, or they'd be fighting relegation at least for the rest of the year. I think we talked about on our preview show on Thursday nights about the fact that they really did look in trouble. But once those players came back, obviously Sheikh Ndoye was a big miss over the course of January. He's huge for them as way of Senegal. Carl Toko Kambe is a huge outlet on the right hand side. They missed him over 7 games in the winter as well. And Famar Dehedu is the real focal point. So when those 3 players came back, they really kicked on. And Stefan Moulin, I think, has done a really underrated job. He's been absolutely fantastic since they're promoted and getting them promoted as well. They play really good football. It isn't necessarily sort of as flashy or as in your face as perhaps some of the other teams. They don't stand out in that regard, but they've got some really lovely little players. Thomas Mangani's been brilliant. Centre backs Tamar and Traore have been fantastic since promotion, and they've done very well to get into that mid-table position and have a cup final to look forward to. So I think it's actually been a relatively productive season. A 12th place finish for a club with, I think, the smallest budget in the league is an impressive return. So I think Moulin and his squad to be happy with that.
Yeah, and they have to also be happy with a player like Nicolas Pepe, who's attracting interest really from all corners of Ligue 1, it seems, with Marcelo Bielsa reportedly watching him at the weekend. Do you think he goes this summer as well? And what do you think to him?
Yeah, I think he will. I think he will go this summer. He's been used relatively sparingly since January, to be honest. Also, he was away at the African Cup of Nations, but he very nearly went on deadline day in January. And since that point, it's almost like they've known that he'll be leaving at the end of the season, and he's been used sort of very sparingly, as I mentioned, in and out of the side. He's only really started 5-6 games since then. He started the last 2 as well towards the end of the season. I don't know if he'll start the cup final, though there's a lot of competition in that area in the squad. Pierre Capel, Jonathan Bamba have performed well at times this season. So there is some competition, but I think given that his age is 21 and he's got sort of that X factor that perhaps some of the other players in that position, at least in their squad, don't have. And I think in terms of talent and potential, he is above most of their squad in terms of where you would expect to see him in 2 or 3 years' time. And I think he could easily go to somewhere in the top half of Ligue 1 or even abroad. But I think probably Ligue 1. I think he'd be a good fit at Saint-Etienne, perhaps. I know that Marseille were linked very heavily in the winter, but I don't know that he might, the way they're looking in terms of transfers now, I don't know if he necessarily suits them. He certainly wouldn't start for them going forward, given he's got Touvan and Dimitri Payet to contend with on the wings. But he's very direct, very quick, but he's also got that sort of little bit of, like, he looks like he's going to make something happen, something unusual. He's not just an athlete, he's a very, very skillful player as well, and can pick a pass and can finish too. So I think he's got a bright future ahead of him, and I think there are a number of Ligue 1 clubs that would jump at a chance to sign him. And I think given Angers' limited resources, a bit of a relatively small bid by comparison to the things we're seeing in terms of transfer bids and transfer moves. He could prize him away, and I think Angers would be okay with that. I kind of think they kind of need to sell those sort of players. It's almost like their model, if you like, that they can get promoted and they can sell on some of their talented young players. He was picked up relatively obscurely at last summer, so I think it would have been a good return if they get sort of 5, maybe even slightly more million for him euros wise. That would be a good deal for all parties concerned, I think. But yeah, I'd love to see him in Ligue and playing for one of the sort of top 8 sides. I think he'd be an asset to them.
Yeah, and I think that'd be a really excellent sort of next step up for a player like that, and a decent end to the season. As like you rightly said, with that sort of budget, you have to really commend Moulin and his team for staying up yet again quite comfortably. So excellent season for them in the end. And another team that really turned it round after a worrying start of the season, Eric, was Nantes, who have had a real incredible second half of the season, at least under Conceição, who really has been a revelation in Ligue 1 this season, hasn't he?
Yeah, I don't think we can say enough praise for Conceição, given where this team were, given that he's got these players, since he took over, and this club's form is enough to be in the Europa League. They have 38 points in 22 matches under Conceição. 2 teams have 39, and then beyond that, it's the top 3. I mean, this is an absolutely incredible achievement. He's had the younger players improving. I'm thinking the likes of Dubois, Rongier have come on leaps and bounds. The players he's brought in have worked out, particularly Préjus Nakuma, who really impressed at the Africa Cup of Nations. He's come in. He's been a reliable scorer. Emiliano Sala's had the best season of his career. That's no coincidence. And he's got this team playing really well. They know their roles. He's also promoted the young goalkeeper, Maxime Dupé. Not have a strong academy tradition, and what Conceição has done is to play with an attacking style that harkens back to Nantes' strong history. He's integrated those young players while also, bringing in the right kinds of canny veterans and allowing them to play as well. It's, some of the players that have come in predate him. Obviously, Lucas Lima has been really good too, and he's from the summer. But I think that Conceição has his team playing consistently. He's a big favor of not rotating players. And that had been a problem, I think, in terms of, particularly the wingers and the strikers earlier in the season. He played Stupinski, he played Kacha Nikolic, he played Nikolai Thompson, and there wasn't really a level of consistency in terms of the Nantes attacking play. But he has his team playing positive attacking football without losing that solid defensive core that they have. And I think they're really one to watch. I know that there are other clubs that are also looked at to improve over the summer, in terms of Marseille, in terms of Lille, with their investment in their new ownership. But I think that we shouldn't perhaps even count out Nantes as being a European contender next season if Conceição can hang on to the core of players that he has. Obviously Jardim and Favre, their achievements have been a lot more impressive this season. But I think in another season, we would be talking about Conceição as being manager of the season. 19th, I believe, when he took over. I think they finished the season 7th, and so that's European form over the time he's been in charge, and that's really saying something, especially considering that there's 4 teams in the current top 3 in Marseille that have been in really good form down the back half of the season, and to rank right behind them is a really, really impressive achievement given the players he had to work with and Nantes' resources overall.
Yeah, I think there was a stat the other day where if the Ligue season had started when Conceição was initially appointed, the Nantes would have finished 4th, which is a credible testament to how well he did in that second half of the season and how he really turned them around. Another team, and you've mentioned them briefly there, that have had an excellent second half of the season is Marseille. And who better to get in than French football journalist Mohamed Ali to talk about his side and their dramatic turnaround. Welcome to the show, Mo.
Hi, good evening.
Yeah, from doom and gloom, really, at the start of the season, we were chatting to real European qualification, which you mentioned earlier this season was probably your ideal scenario for this club. The 5th place above Bordeaux. You must be delighted with the end of the season under Rudy Garcia, remaining unbeaten for those last 8 or 10 games.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Considering at some point in October, or after the defeat in November to Monaco, Marseille were 12th in the table, and having gone, through the players that they still had and And the starting point really of the club at the beginning of the season was Franck Passy with no owner, no permanent coach, and really no direction. To finish fifth in what was a very competitive league season this year is a very good achievement for all the players.
And let's focus on one real bright spot, and that's Florian Thauvin, who had an excellent season both in front of goal and assisting. He's really matured, hasn't he, into that role of being a little bit more of the figurehead now at Marseille, and he seems really settled. Do you see him growing into a real superstar possibly at the Stade Velodrome?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was his proper coming of age really, because of he did have a difficult season last year, both in England and a pretty mixed loan spell this time last year. And the fact that he did make an effort to return to Marseille, he knew that maybe this is a turning point for his career, because if he hadn't really imposed himself this year, then people definitely would have written him off. So for him to really take a failing team by the horns and to impose himself and to learn from the leaders in the dressing room such as Bafétimbi Gomis, he spoke a lot of Gomis's influence this weekend, and to really become almost like a figurehead, like you said, of this new Marseille project, just goes to show how much he's really worked and developed this season. And it's credit to him, because obviously 2-3 seasons ago he'd been labelled as the bad boy of French football, of somebody who was ready to throw his career away after the acrimonious move from Lille, and not really being given his all. Could have turned into another Ben Arfa, for example, back in his early days. But no, absolutely, people speak of him as a future Marseille captain, as a person that will stay at Marseille for a very, very long time. It was just about 15 months ago where he was targeted by the Marseille fans, having a bottle thrown at him twice actually, before he left for Newcastle and after, when Marseille lost 5-2 to Rennes last spring. And it just goes to show how much things have changed in a very short period of time.
Yeah, and it's crazy what money can do for you sometimes, isn't it? But let's focus on sort of maybe what we're looking at in the future, and that's sort of gearing towards this interesting summer that Marseille are looking at, and bringing in extra players. What do they need to do this summer to really compete, possibly on a Champions League level, with the likes of maybe that third spot being up for grabs with Lyon losing some players and Nice maybe not being able to keep the same caliber of players? What do Marseille need to do to ruffle some feathers in those top 3 spots?
Yeah, no, it's easy, when a club comes into money to just, spend on the marquee signing or 3, in terms of, when you look at Paris Saint-Germain. But what Marseille need to do is replicate what, Monaco and Nice have done, to spend widely, but spend wisely as well. There's no surprise that the club needs to recruit about 8 or 9 players this summer, because much of the squad this season were either loan deals or players that were signed for free, or for very low amounts of transfers. There's a lot of dead wood in the squad, so Marseille do have a lot of work. The leaders do have a lot of work to kind of build the squad with some decent talent and some decent cover as well. To build a proper squad of 23, Marseille have kind of been lumbering with a squad of 18 for the past 2-3 years because of those financial difficulties. So I think recruiting domestically would be a very good shout because of the fees, the manageable fees involved. But there will be 1 or 2 marquee signings, particularly at number 9. A proven goal scorer across Europe would be a very good a very good decision to make, because the club are embarking on European football next season, and they do want to return to the Champions League. That's the aim for next season as well. So getting a renowned goal scorer such as Javier Hernandez, for example, who I think is not enjoying a good situation at Bayer Leverkusen, that possibly could be a good thing. Keeping Bafétimbi Gomis, I think would also be a good shout. Or recruiting Saint-Germain from Monaco, that would be decent too. So pretty much, I think 8 or 9 players was the aim this summer. But then again, it's not worth spending 100 million just for the sake of it. So I really hope that the club has done their homework, because this has been a long time coming.
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting summer. We've mentioned already in places like Lille, but it's going to be excellent to watch what happens at the Velodrome and how they decide to expand this team with the newfound style. So thank you for joining us again, Mo, and we'll speak to you again next season as well. We'll look forward to it again. Hopefully it's less topsy-turvy this time.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Joining us now to talk about the team that missed out on Europa League football, at least for now, in Bordeaux, is our friend from GFFN and GFFN writer, Raphael Jukoban. Thank you for joining us, Raphael.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's talk about a really interesting season, really, under Gourvenec, where it got off to a relatively slow start, but they built up a considerable amount of speed, especially in that second half, where for the longest time it was only PSG that was really their conquerors over the first sort of 3 months of 2017. How do you rate his first season at the Matmut?
I'd say overall it's obviously a lot better than last season, that's for sure. We've got more of we've solidified more. We've got more of a sort of a plan, an attacking plan, game plan. We know what we're doing. So I think overall to go from 11th to 6th is obviously a great improvement, especially considering the last few years. So yeah, what Gourvenec has brought us has been defensive stability as well as more of a concrete plan to approach games with.
Let's talk about some of those more leading lights and players that have really shined for Bordeaux. And there's the likes of Malcolm, who's had his brief moments, and then also springing to mind, Laborde had his moments as well. Who's really stood out for you for Bordeaux this season?
For me, it's been Younous Sankharé who came in January from Lille. Most fans were quite not very optimistic about it because obviously he hadn't had a great season first half of the season at Lille. And we thought, it's just Gourvenec bringing along some of his old Guingamp players. But in the end, he's brought us this element of stability in midfield as well as chipping in with a few goals. For me, he's been the reason that we've managed to play so well in the second half of the season, and sort of go on this run to go up to 6th. Because obviously we only lost to the top 3 in the second half of the season. So I think he's been the instigator of all that. After that, you've got Youssouf Sabaly as well at right back, who's had an impressive season. Hopefully we can try and get him on a permanent deal. And
yeah, that would really be the ideal scenario, wouldn't it? We'll finish with someone who I've really enjoyed this season, and I hope it's shared by yourself, and that's Valentin Varda, the young Argentinian who has slowly sort of built his way into the side and was a real force in the second half of the season. Is he a kind of player that Gourvenec should build this new Bordeaux team around with his youth and his exuberance to get box to box?
I'd say so, yeah. I mean, he's become more prominent in the team in the second half of the season. You can tell in Gourvenec's starting 11s that the midfield's really been picked around him and Sankharé as a sort of tandem. So obviously he's quite a creative player as well. So, and as well as being a sort of box to box, really, Relegation in French. So I'd say he should be the sort of person that we should be building around next season, definitely.
And having one of the more exciting young French managers as well does help as well. Thank you, Raphael, for joining us this evening, and we shall speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Let's move on to a team that, well, we've mentioned a few teams now that have had an excellent second half of the season, but let's go with one that had a really great first start to the season, Adam, and that's Toulouse. I mean, we all love Pascal Dupraz. It's difficult not to, but his team has really dipped in the second half of the season quite alarmingly, and we're flirting with those relegation places for a brief moment, and we're a little bit stale, really, in the second half as well, even though they brought in some attacking players. What sort of changed in that second half of the season that really unsettled their rhythm?
It's a really interesting question because I feel like there's a number of factors. First, I feel like they kind of run out of steam. I think with Dupraz, and again, those of you who listen to our Thursday night pod will know how much of a fan I am of him. As you mentioned, it's difficult not to be, but it's almost like his teams are very sort of, there's a lot of they're sort of wound very tight, and I think he sort of builds them up in terms of their sort of mentality, and they're sort of running on sort of quite a sort of they're very pressurized, if you see what I mean, and they kind of ran out of steam towards sort of the middle part of the year, and they couldn't keep those intense and sort of very aggressive battling, especially midfield performances, up as consistency as he would have liked. So their sort of intensity dropped as a squad as they reached that middle part of the season, and they realized that they weren't going to get relegated, or they didn't look like they were, and they weren't going to be pushing for Europe anymore, even though they looked like they might be. They're in the top 3 or 4 at the early part of the season, as you mentioned. So it kind of just dropped off a little bit, and that for a quite small percentage overall it was enough for this team to sort of drop in performance, and they lost that edge that really gave them that fantastic result against Monaco at home and beating PSG at home as well. They were brilliant in those 2 games. I think when you look at players like Alexis Blanc, he's crucial for Toulouse, and I think Dupraz highlighted him around Christmas time, but he's been struggling with a really sort of niggling like heel injury, and I think he had to have an operation on it over the summer. It's something that's really affected his game, and when he hasn't played very well, neither of Toulouse. So that's one area that they've also struggled in. I think as well that if they hadn't signed Andy Delort, it could have been a little bit worse for them too. He gave them a bit of a shot in the arm for sort of a month or two, and they looked a little bit better when he first signed. They had a couple of 4-goal wins in his first few games, which arguably kept them out of that relegation fight. So it's hopefully next season they can sort of find a way to maintain that intensity and keep that midfield area a little bit fitter. I think Oscar Trejo will be a big miss next year, but they'll obviously hopefully keep Blanc. I think Jan Bodega perhaps get more of a chance, and I think he's a very good player. So I think it's keeping that core of the Dupraz generation wound tight and fit that would be Dupraz next season.
Very quickly, let's talk about probably my favourite defensive partnership in Ligue, and that's Issa Diop and Christophe Julien. They've both had excellent seasons, really, and potential really if they can keep, especially Diop, in that they can have a real solid base for years to come. Yeah,
I 100% agree. I think they're very underrated in terms of a defensive partnership. I'm a huge fan of them both. Issa Diop has been linked with big moves already this week and in the last few months, and justifiably so. He's sort of been in the team for about 18 months now. He's only 20, and anybody that saw the Under-20 World Cup game, France this morning when they beat Honduras 3-0, he was monumental in that game, and it really showed what a leader he could be and how sort of varied and versatile he could be in terms of being a centre back. He reads his game really well. He's quick. He's great in the air. He's good in the opposition box too, and I think Julian's the perfect fall for him. He's also fantastic in the opposition area, has a very similar profile, perhaps a little bit more experience, and they really work in tandem fantastically well. And they have been a huge base for Toulouse's better performances and really saved them when they haven't performed too well. So they're arguably, in terms of a pair outside the top 3 or 4, the best centre-back partnership in the league. And if they can keep them both, I don't know that they'll keep Diop. I think Julian might be a good fit for someone like Lyon, to be honest, as well. But if they can keep them both, it'll be huge going into next season. And they're genuinely a fantastic pair. And I think they've done very well to sort of mould them together with the young players around them. So really interesting to watch, and hopefully they can keep them both and push on next season.
Yeah, and that's the real hope, that this young side with a lot of interesting young French players especially can sort of move back into the sort of middle places, and even maybe if they can contend in the European places again, that'll be really interesting. But that's yet to be seen really with the team. Let's move on to a side that just about really escaped a relegation fight really with a strong second half of the season again. And we can only talk about Metz with one person really, and that's French football writer Jeremy Smith. Thank you for joining us, Jez.
Hi, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. Let's talk about your side, who, like we mentioned, after it was a really interesting January transfer window, and bringing in someone like Cheikh Diabaté to get the goals that they were really struggling with, sort of propelled them into this position that's finally seen them stay in Ligue 1 this season.
Yeah, I think going into the start of the season, we all felt that we'd had a really good summer transfer window as well. But the only concern, or the main concern, was defence and possibly sort of out and out striker, and someone that could be relied on for goals. And the first month or so, it looked like we were doing okay with Erding, but I mean, I've never really thought of him as a great striker, and he always seems to perform in fits and starts, like have great sort of months or two, and then vanishes months on end. Which this time it was partly down to injuries as well. But as soon as he went quiet, Metz went quiet, had a lot of off the field problems, and then the sort of genius move was to bring in Cheikh Diabate in January, who I think is over a goal every 2 games, and it was basically his goals that kept us up.
Yeah, and he's also sorry, carry on, Jeremy.
No, go on.
It cut off then. It went a little bit strange, but he does my favourite chant, at least in Ligue, and we were talking about it earlier on Twitter. It's a superb new little one. I'd not heard anything like that one. It's a really, really interesting one. But like you were saying, he's really added an extra focal point that they were missing, weren't they?
I think it's a couple of things. Firstly, there's that focal point at the up front and centre, which I think probably helped Ismail Assar as well, because there was something to actually aim for rather than just head down and straight off the pitch. And then also, I think you probably can't understate what an influence he's had sort of off the pitch and just generally the atmosphere. Everything that happened with the start of the season was okay. We already had taken a couple of batterings. I mean, as an aside, I think we had over 10 defeats of 3 goals or more, and it's in a sense it's spectacular that we stayed up. I think only 3 teams in the history of the French League have stayed up with a worse goal difference, and sort of not since like the 50s or something. Things started okay until we lost 4-0 to Nancy in the derby, and then the following match was the one with the flare against Lyon, which caused as well as obviously the cancellation of the match and the temporary loss of points, it also caused a lot of political problems and nastiness within Metz, with the main sort of ultra group being banned. And it's maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but Diabate, he just seems such a good guy, always a smile on his face, good with the fans, good with the rest of the team. And I think that feel-good factor, as well as his goals on the pitch, I think did sort of help calm the whole atmosphere within the club and help them in the second half of the season. Yeah,
and another player that I wrote a piece on earlier this week, and I'm pretty sure you didn't want me to quite write it yet, Jez, with the speculation already coming around him, and that's Ismail Sarr, the youngster from Senegal, and the Generation Foot again link with Metz really coming off clean. He's had a super second half of the season, and every time he seems to take the pitch, there's a little spark of something, isn't there? A little bit extra special about him, and he was another player again that's just propelled Metz again to safety, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think the first half of the season, I mean, when he first arrived, we heard all this stuff about, his coaches say he's better than Sadio Mane, and he's a real one for the future. So, but at the same time, we knew he was young and raw, so we weren't sure what kind of a chance he'd get. And then the very first match, he came on as a sub against Lille and pretty much turned the match on its head. Then, he sort of went quiet. He went into a sort of Walcott role of, looking promising with his speed and then not knowing what to do at the end of it, sort of crossing when he should have shot, shooting when he should have crossed, or, like I said, basically just running off the pitch, sort of Forrest Gump style. But he went to the African Cup of Nations, and I think maybe that really sort of helped him mature, maybe gave him a bit of confidence. Apparently he's sort of quite a shy lad. I think he's sort of struck up quite a friendship with Diagne, who was another January signing. And yes, in the second half of the season, he's been fantastic. He's really showing end product as well. He must be, if not among the most fouled players in the league. Frankly, like just the match that the second match against Nancy, which they won, he probably got fouled more times in that match than most players had over the course of the season. But he's been fantastic. I mean, he's scored 3 or 4 goal of the season contenders. There's brilliant curling shot past Ruffier against Saint-Etienne. There was the bicycle kick against Caen. And then the one against Nancy, where he sort of controlled a high ball brilliantly in his own half and then ran half the length of the pitch before slotting it away. He, against PSG, he almost turned the game when he came on, setting up Diabate for the equaliser and just terrorising their defence. He looks, he really looks like a talent, and I'm hoping that we can keep him for at least another year, but there's definitely going to be interest. Certainly this summer, and if he carries on, starts next season the same way, it's going to be tough to keep hold of him.
Yeah, I think that's the trouble with a lot of young players nowadays, that the teams seem to lock their eyes on them quite quickly and try and take them away just as quickly as well. It'd be lovely to see him again for another season in Ligue. And thank you again, Jez, for joining us this evening, and we'll hopefully have some more good times to speak about next season as well.
I hope so. Thanks a lot.
Right, and we continue speeding through this tragedy of Ligue teams, and we're slowly getting towards the end. And Eric, another team that we're similar to Toulouse in the sense that they had a really good first half of the season, but a pretty poor second one, and that's probably making it kindly in the case of Guingamp, who under Camboire looked really positive with some really good results, and Coco playing and Briand had an excellent season probably overall, but they really sharply dipped again in the second half of the season. Is that a worrying sign for you?
It's hard to say. I think that the real Guingamp, if you will, lies somewhere between that European contender fifth place and the team that we saw in the second half of the season. And I think their final league placement is probably a fair assessment of where they are. I think that, though I do think that it's been impressive to see how Camboire has brought in veteran players, and they've done really well. I think the likes of Dido, Luca Do, Janssen, the goalkeeper coming in, I think has done really well as well. But he's also brought in, I think, players who he's brought through rather young players who have really impressed as well. And I think that shouldn't be undersold. I know Coco is not an academy player, but he's a good signing from PSG. But also the continued development of the likes of Coco and Blas, I think has been really impressive as well. So it's been a good season. I think that Guingamp perhaps will rue being a little bit loose at the back. I think that the Camboire sort of struggled for ideas. He cycled through quite a bit of tactical systems towards the back end of the season. Did he want to play Briand as a lone striker alongside of Privat or Mendy? Did he want to play Salabur on the right? Did he want to play Salabur on the left as a playmaker? So there's a lot of uncertainty over Camboire and his ability to succeed with that team. That he seemed to run out of ideas and run out of ways to motivate the team. But even with that being the case, I think that some of the results that they had, and also Coupe de France semifinal is nothing to sneeze at either. I think it's overall been a positive season for Guingamp. This is a team that didn't really invest that heavily in the summer, but did lose a fairly important player in Sankare over the summer, and I think recovered from that fairly well in the players that they brought in. That perhaps the likes of Adido, I know, who is older but had a great season, Luca Do. I think that having a more established name like Camboire in the Breton side allowed them to build on that. Now it looks like he might be going to Saint-Etienne as a replacement for Galtier. So I think that's another intriguing prospect. If he can have a little bit more consistency rather than the uneven season Guingamp had, I think Saint-Etienne shouldn't see too much of a drop-off from Christophe Galtier if that move does indeed come to pass.
And just very quickly then on that point, that if he does join Saint-Etienne, is there any worry about Guingamp if they maybe lose a couple of players here and there as well? Maybe someone like Salibur leaves or maybe Coco. I can't imagine Briand has another move in him at his current age. But is that maybe a worry that if they lose a couple of players in those attacking areas and they maybe are a little bit weaker in defensive areas and losing the manager combined with it, that they might be in for a relegation fight next season?
No, I don't think so. I think that this team top to bottom has a really nice balance of young talent and veteran talent. I think there's also players that like an Alexander Mendy, who've shown flashes and aren't exactly young, but because of their own situation, and Mendy didn't get a whole lot of playing time at Nice, there's still more to come from them. And I think that's important to note too. Brian signed a contract extension. I think that he's really enjoyed his time at the club, the success they've had in Coupe de France, and being challenging for Europe. I think that he enjoyed that certainly more than being in a relegation scrap when he was at Hannover in Germany. And I think that he's content to close out his career here. He's someone who's shown a lot of maturity, and having a player like that, having other players that are veteran presences like Doe, Mustafa Diallo. I think there's frankly too much veteran nous in this team for Guingamp to really struggle next season. Even if they do lose a key creative player like player you just mentioned,
Salabir.
Like Salabir, there are still other options beyond him. Block can play on the wing, as he has for France, and there's also Neil Depas as well. So I think there's a plan of succession there, even if Guingamp to have happy losses in the summer. And I think that veteran core will allow them to continue to succeed, if not at being a contender for Europe, certainly being comfortably mid-table once again.
And that can only be good news for them. Our final guest this evening is going to talk about one of the real surprise packages in Ligue 1, if you maybe discount Monaco a little bit, and that's Nice. And covering that is our very own Lucas Mirani. Welcome to the show, Lucas.
Great. Thanks to be here. Great to be here.
Let's talk about what has been really a surprising and fantastic season for a team that we all expected to really have a drop-off, even with a fantastic manager and a couple of interesting players added to the mix. How impressed have you been with them this season?
Well, I've been very impressed, and I think partly because of how well they played last season. You see this a lot with clubs like Nice, where they have an impressive season, and then they fall off a bit, and they revert back to their mid-table role. Good players like Ben Arfa and Germain leave, and I think the fact that they hired a manager like Lucien Favre, who in my opinion is one of the best coaches in Europe, was a real sign of intent. And I think they've had a fantastic season, and I think if they can continue to keep hold of their core key players, then I think they can challenge for the title potentially next season.
And that's really where the crux of the argument comes for next season, at least. But let's talk about Favre, who's arguably, with Hardim, the best manager of the season, and probably will, if he could have possibly done, exceeded expectations as well. How has he sort of transformed this team in that, like you say, really overachieved last season, but have even gone even further this season?
Well, I think he's been brilliant, and part of that has been his use of tactical systems. When the season started, he started with a 4-3-3 system, and I mean they won a couple of games, but I wouldn't say they were playing well or to their potential. And the signing of Dante allowed him to switch to a back three, which was extremely successful throughout the middle of the season. And then he was very unlucky that he lost some players through injury, like Ricardo Pereira, like Villain Cyprian, and he switched back to a back four, and that again had success with that system. So I think part of Nice's success has been his ability to adapt to different circumstances with the players at his disposal.
And you've mentioned one player that's really shone despite his injury in March, and that's Willian Cyprian, who's been impressing us all this season until that unfortunate incident that's really ended his season early. How good has he been? And is he a future really that they can build around someone like Cyprian in the future?
I think he's a brilliant player. I think you can't underestimate the impact he had coming from their midfield. I think if there's one criticism of Nice is that despite having a goal scorer like Balotelli, they often didn't have a real secondary player on the field who was also a goal scorer. And that was partly because of injuries to players. And I think Cyprian really stepped up into that role and almost into a Frank Lampard-esque role of arriving late in the box and converting. I think going into the future, he can definitely be a player that they build around. The key will be, will he stay? Because I think with his performances this season, plenty of clubs will have seen him play and think, he'd be a great addition.
And that's always the difficulty with the financial situations and of clubs like that. And let's talk about, let's say, the controversial point really of Nice, and probably the controversial point of many of his seasons, and that's Mario Balotelli. How has he been for the French side this season? Has he, in a sense, succeeded with the amount of goals he scored, or is he still a little bit underwhelming of what we expect from the Italian?
It's a strange situation because on one hand, you look at his total and he has 15 Ligue 1 goals, which is very impressive, and it's hard to criticize that. But then there's also periods of the season where he struggled, and there was a lot of justified criticism towards his performances. And I think the one thing Lucien Favre, if he stays, that's not decided yet, but if he does, will have to improve is his play when he's not in the box scoring goals, because we all know he can finish. He's a great goal scorer, but what does he do in the other 80 minutes when he doesn't have the ball? And I think if he wants to continue his success and maybe get to the next level with Nice, he'll need to improve that.
Oh, I think Lucas's mic might have gone a little bit off then. It's gone off the trail, but we'll finish there. Thank you, Lucas, for joining us and being on the show, and we'll make sure to speak to you next season as well. But let's move on really to another team that at least this summer will be interesting. That's Saint-Etienne, Adam, and they're obviously losing a very famous and beloved, at least for a long period, manager in Christophe Galtier. Although this season's been a bit frustrating, will he be a big miss come the next season if they don't find someone that's really ready to fill his shoes?
Yeah, I really think he will be a huge miss for the next season. I think, although when you look at it, I think when he took over Saint-Etienne, they were in the bottom 3 or 4 of the league. He's been there 8 years now, 8 years or so, and towards the end of his spell at the club over the last 3 or 4 seasons, they were on a couple of occasions genuine Champions League or top 3, or the podium as it's often called in France, contenders. And I know they're a very big club and they've got tremendous pulling power, and they've got fantastic fans. So it's a very good situation to walk into in terms of sort of the basis to build on. But the job he's done in terms of taking them from that lower end of the table to a regular top 7, top 6, top 4 even contender is can't be underestimated. And something that Galtier is particularly good at is he gets the best out of average players. I think over the course of his spell at the club, he's obviously had some fantastic players in his team, like Aubameyang is a really good example. Hamoum has been a good player for them over the course of the last few years. Obviously, Max-Allan Gradel was brilliant for them, but they've also had lots of average players, and those players have performed at the level that you perhaps would expect from them, and that's one of Gautier's particular talents. He's also very good defensively, and we talked about him on the pod before being a little bit boring, and the style of Saint-Etienne being a little bit dogged and a little bit sort of dull. But they do get results, and they squeeze results out of every sort of every league season, if you like. They don't do particularly well against the bigger sides, but they get points, and he's very, very good at maximising the talent of his team. So I think, given that they haven't got the resources, that they recently said, they were proud to be the only sort of fully French club in the top 6. They also said that they can't compete with those sides that do have the resources and those foreign investment that has become very common in Ligue. And so I think the next manager coming is going to have a very, very difficult job to replicate the performances of Saint-Etienne under Christophe Galtier with limited resources, and with teams like Lille and Marseille and Nice, really catching them up and surpassing them in terms of the sort of new owners and funds being spent on players, that they're going to find it very, very difficult to repeat those successes. So I think he's actually very underrated in terms of his management ability and in terms of getting results and finding a replacement to perform at the similar level. They might get a more exciting coach, they might get a more attack-minded coach, it might be better to watch next season, but challenging for a top 6 place is going to be very, very difficult.
And let's focus really on this season as well as a whole. This season, we have criticised Galtier a lot this season of maybe being a little bit too negative in the team, not really lacking a player in the final third that can really get them the goals. I mean, when you have someone like Hamoum as your top scorer, he's a great player, but you want someone else to really grab the headlines from a goals point of view. Is that the real criticism of them this season, that they've really struggled in that final third, haven't they?
They really have. You're absolutely right. I think Hamoum is not necessarily an out-and-out goal scorer, but he has been used in the centre-forward position a couple of times just because they completely lack the options up there. I think Robert Beric was obviously very, very prolific at Rapid Vienna, and he came in, and I think he's a good finisher. He sort of plays between the width of the penalty area, and he's a very much a number 9, and he'll hold up the play well, and he's a poacher. But he's been so difficult to keep himself fit. He's had a season and perhaps more even of injury issues, and without him being at peak fitness, they've really struggled to find a replacement. Alexander Soden came in from Rosenborg, and I think he's had a very up and down career in France so far. And even in Norway, our Norwegian analyst tells me that he regularly missed clear chances in Norway. Obviously, got a few more playing for easily the best team in that league over recent years. So he perhaps was an interesting, sort of an unusual signing, a bit of a gamble perhaps, and he hasn't really fitted in. So they do need a striker. But even when either of them plays, the Mahuma's not the quickest anymore. Mane Paquet's a direct player, but the central striker is often very isolated, and he doesn't get much support because of those, apart from those wide players who often are quite wide and quite sort of isolated themselves. The three central midfield players of sort of Lemoine often, Henri Saivet, Benjamin Cornier recently, Vincent Pajot, Ole Sones, they're all very defensively minded for a three. There's no real attack in that attacking player like a number 10 or someone who's going to really pick a pass. Jordan Verretu's trying to fill that gap, and he's performed relatively well on occasion, and he's probably been the best of their midfielders since he came in on loan, but they just lack the guile in midfield to support Beric and support those wide players and give them the opportunities. So yes, they struggle in the final third, you're absolutely right, but they struggle in the second third as well, if you like. They can't provide the chances, and when they do get them, the strikers haven't been the most clinical or prolific or even fit, as we mentioned with Beric. So it's a very, very difficult situation. They do struggle to score goals.
Yeah, and that's a real recipe of disaster, isn't it? Not being able to create, not being able to
really
score. That probably tells you why Lever have been pretty dire to watch this season, in all honesty. Let's move on now to, got three more clubs left on this review. And Eric, a team that avoided relegation in the end in Dijon, they were relatively comfortable on the final day at least, but they probably deserved it out of those several teams there, that they were playing the more entertaining, at least, or more attack-minded football, especially for the majority of the season, at least, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this team, could be a little bit shaky at the back, but I think that they've done really well in the transfer window. I think we should maybe look at them as perhaps a more attractive Angers. Angers had used this plan of bringing in some better players from Ligue 2, and I think that really worked out well for them. You look at the likes of Younes Abdelhamid, Fouad Shafiq, I think had done really well in Ligue 2 last season, and they've, I think, made the league fairly well to Ligue 1 with Dijon. And I think that Olivier Dalloglio and the sporting team at Dijon deserve credit for that. The players they brought in at the winter window too, the Korean Kwon Chang-hoon and Haddadi, the fullback, have looked not out of place either. I think Kwon is really one for the future in particular. So yeah, I think that they got their just rewards. I mean, they could be a little bit loose at the back, but in Diony and Tavares, you had some real attacking threats. You also had veteran players like a Pierre-Lise Malou. I think that things really came off well for Dijon. They were never dull to watch, and they stuck to their plans. I mean, I think that we've seen at times in recent seasons, we've seen teams try to play defensive, teams try to play attractively, and realize it's not going to work and sort of go into a show, whether that's within the course of a match or within the course of the season at large. We really saw that with Dijon, and I think that that's a massive credit. I think that the summer could be difficult for them, particularly for a player like Diony goes, or Baptiste Rene. But overall, it's been a good season for them to stay in Ligue 1 with sort of limited means, but also do it playing attractive football. Is a season well done.
Yeah, and you've mentioned him briefly there, and that's one of the real worries. Do you think Diony will stay this summer, or will some of the interest around Ligue 1 of getting a striker with a number of teams really needing a front man, may he be tempted to leave?
Yeah, I think it'd be, if someone offers, say, 8 to 10 million for him, I don't see him staying. I think that kind of money for a club like Dijon is too difficult to ignore, unfortunately.
Yeah, and with the amount of goals he scores for teams like Saint-Etienne or Rennes, who are really struggling for an out-and-out goal scorer, he seems like the kind of player that either of those clubs could really use. On to the final two clubs, and both the relegated sides are left for you both, gentlemen, and I'll give you Nancy, Adam. And they almost did it, didn't they? They had a really good result at the weekend, but really their season was sort of dealt with before that they never really seemed to score enough goals, and the defensive solidity never really came to the fore often enough. And in key games, that lack of goals cost them, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. I think they were so unlucky. They came so close to sort of almost just surviving. I think Lorient would be pretty lucky, perhaps, that Issa Dier was injured for the final 2 games, and because he was very good for them, their top scorer, and was a real outlet on their right hand side and provided a lot of attacking thrust for the team. And although it was minimal overall, he was their most their most attacking and most effective player. So I think they've got a little bit of luck there. But yeah, they did struggle to score goals. I mean, none of their strikers performed at all really over the course of the season. Their central strikers, and they sort of suffered from not being able to sort of develop their Ligue 2 winning side. It was a very, very similar team that got promoted, and they sort of maximised their resources. I think it's a bit of an opportunity missed to some extent, because if they kept Clement Lenglet, obviously they can't say no to the money that Sevilla offered, but he was very, very good for them, and they didn't replace him at all. And that wasn't necessarily a mistake. It was probably a necessity, but it's an unfortunate reality of their limited resources and of their season. So they were sort of unfortunate. Correa did well to rotate his side. In the middle part of the year, they're up in the mid-table area, and it looked like that he keeping his players fresh and hungry and rotating their side was working for him. But I think their lack of quality just caught up with them, and the fact when you can't score goals even by French standards, which it's not even though this season's been different over the past years, there haven't been too many goals in Ligue, and then when you're at the lower end of the scoring charts, you really have a problem in that final third, and that became their undoing, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'll ask this question for both these remaining teams, really. But is there anyone you see, Adam, at Nancy that will stay in Ligue 1 for next season?
Yeah, I think there's a number of players. Perhaps one, well, maybe not a number, but it's maybe a little exaggeration. But there's definitely 1 or 2 guys that stood out. I think Fatou Moras is the obvious one. Obviously, just joined up with the France under-20 squad, and although he wasn't even really getting into the squad around October, November, December time, the last 15 games he's been absolutely fantastic. Very direct, as we mentioned before on the pod. He really started to complement Dier and on the other wing on the left. Has played in a variety of positions as well. Played central midfield, played left back, and played number 10 on one occasion. And he's a very exciting. Only 18. He's someone that if Nancy were to be able to hold on to, that would be huge for them in the second division. But you would imagine that other sides would come looking for him, because he could really complement a few Ligue 1 attacks. Apart from him, I think there've been some solid midfield performers. Youssef Benassa was good when he given a chance, but he obviously his injury spell and his spell at the African Nations Cup kind of curtailed his performances in the side. But he was a very solid midfield performer, scored a few goals as well as a Moroccan international. So he's someone that perhaps one of the promoted teams might be looking at. And same goes for Diao Guidlo, who plays. I think he's Mauritania's captain, and he had some decent performances in that midfield as well. And perhaps again, promoted sides would do well to pick him up. But I think the problem with, as I mentioned, it is a Ligue 2 squad, and they didn't add any Ligue 1 quality as Metz did, especially with Coad and Diabate, and perhaps even Dijon, who added some interesting players in Balmont, and I know it didn't come off, but Marvin Martin as well. So I think if they kept the squad together, they would be in contention for promotion again. But given that lack of quality really kept up with them, they might be able to. But I think Moassa would be one that would be moving on for sure.
And Moassa looks like an interesting player that I think will probably get some Liga club coming in for him in the summer. But let's finish with where we started really with, and that's with you, Eric, and a team that's probably been more in infamy than off the field and around the game rather than on the field. They almost, in Bastia, had a chance at sort of maybe nicking safety from the jaws of really a relegation that seemed almost certain at one point, but they couldn't quite really push over the line. But it was probably on the course of an entire season, was it maybe a little bit just that they went down?
I think so, yeah. I think that they made some really intriguing loan signs. I think we shouldn't take that away from them. That Abdelhamid Al-Kouattari, Pierre Bengtsson, who's a Swedish international, Alan Saint-Maximin, and Enzo Crivelli, obviously. But they struggled a lot with injuries. I think that we can't underestimate the leadership that they had gotten from Sebastian Schillaci. But Alexander Djiku, you talk about players that should stay in the league. I think that he's definitely a potential to do that as a right back. He missed a pretty big chunk pretty big chunk out. Lindsay Rose has been a disappointment at center back. I think it wasn't as if Bastia didn't plan for the season well. I think there's a lot of things didn't come off, and whether that's through injury or through poor form, it's just. I mean, obviously, I think that the issues surrounding the club make them not someone you should have in Liga, given the actions of some of their fans. I say some of their fans again. It's not the club. It's not every fan. It's some sections of fans. But I think that, they've always relied on their home form, and their home form has been not that great this season. I think that's something that's really made the difference. You could count on them getting, 8 or 9 wins at home, but I think this season they won 5 times at home. Yeah. And they just didn't have enough in attack. With the injury issues that Crivelli had, there wasn't a natural outlet. I mean, playing the likes of Lenny Nangis or Axel Ngando at center forward, that's not going to come off. Those kind of players aren't target men the way Crivelli is, and the way they've had in recent seasons with Brandao as well. And lacking that sort of focal point, Bassett just sort of fell apart in attack. And that was the story of their season, that they couldn't get enough wins at home. They only lost 5 times, but 9 draws. You turn 3 of those draws into wins, they've got 6 more points, and they stay up. But it just wasn't enough for them. And I think that, in terms of the culture surrounding the club, I think that going down is a good thing for them, to maybe have the club's hierarchy see what should be expected in terms of comportment from and perception from the club, because there were also some unsavory comments from officials and managers in the wake of some of the incidents that they had, and it's a good thing that they go down to sort of reassess what their values are and reassess what it means to be a professional club in France. Again, in terms of players that should stay in the league, I think maybe Jean-Louis Leca could be a backup for someone in Ligue 1. He had a pretty decent season. I think Jiku certainly deserves to be in Ligue 1. Beyond that, Gail Danic has been decent. Crivelli and St. Maximin are on loan as it is. But Danic is 35, 36. I don't think that he's the kind of player that would stay. For me, that would probably be about it. Maybe Mehdi Mostafa. But yeah, there's not a whole lot to really take away from this club. Lassana Koulibaly, maybe he's a young player someone might take a chance on, but there's not a whole lot of redeeming quality at this club, and that's obviously why they went down.
Yeah, and not even to mention the amount of red cards there were. We were all hoping that in that little melee against Marseille that maybe one more might have been shown, and then they could have had that record. An unsavoury one, if so, but a fun one at least for what was a really strange season. That's all the teams, so that's all that we have time for this week. My thanks to absolutely all of our guests, to Eric, to Philip, Adam, Rich, Jonathan, Robin, Chris, Raphael, Mo, Jeremy, and Lucas. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to this bumper episode. But prepare yourselves for one more show next week. It will be our award show, so do tune into that. It will be our last for the season. But until then, it's a bientôt and goodbye.